On the sweltering late summer morning of 2011, Trenton, New Jersey, was abruptly awakened by a bizarre announcement from the state police's cold case unit. A DNA result from the federal lab, just a few lines of text, had plunged the entire office into absolute silence. At the Trenton Data Center, Detective Maria DeSantis stared at the screen displaying a name forgotten for over 3 decades. Off the Pacific coast, a young man in Honolulu preparing to adopt was stunned to recognize his own face on the missingkids.gov website. In an instant, a past he had never known began to resurface, dragging with it a chain of tragedies buried under layers of dust from time. In the small town of Manchester Township, residents still remembered that summer night in 1980, when the sounds of an argument echoed from the light blue house along Route 70, and then fell silent into the darkness. The next morning, the woman vanished without a trace, leaving behind her 6-month-old son and a husband who said she left. 30 years passed, and everything seemed to have gone cold. The Jane Doe file in cold storage, the tarp stained with cement, the silver bracelet engraved with EM, but the truth never sleeps. As science revisited old clues, the ancient nightmare resurfaced, and the entire state of New Jersey was about to confront a horrifying secret hidden within the very people they once trusted. Before diving into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love these journeys to seek forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next part. On the late afternoon of August 1980, Manchester Township, Ocean County, New Jersey, was stifling with heat and the smell of asphalt wafting from the newly paved road. In the quiet neighborhood dotted with a few wooden houses, the light blue house of the Reed couple stood tucked behind old maple trees, its doors shut tight. Laura Morey, 27, an office worker at the town post office, lived there with her husband, Robert Reed, a construction worker, and their 6-month-old son, Ethan. Neighbors were used to seeing Laura pushing the stroller on evening walks, so when the house suddenly went dead silent that day, everyone found it strange. Around 4 o'clock, someone across the street heard voices arguing, a woman's trembling voice, a man's hoarse and sharp, mixed with the sound of things falling and breaking, and the faint cries of a baby. Then it suddenly stopped. A moment later, only the wind and the old air conditioner's rumbling hum remained. As dusk fell, the lights in the Reed house came on, and then abruptly went out. No one saw Laura step out, nor heard the sound of a car engine starting to leave. That night was muggy, with thick clouds and a thunderstorm approaching from the direction of the river. The next morning, Robert appeared on the porch, looking exhausted, and told the neighbor lady that Laura took Ethan and went probably to her mother's house. His voice was strangely calm, but by noon, when Laura's mother called, then her sister called repeatedly with no answer, worry began to spread through the family. The baby stroller was still on the porch, clothes still hung on the line, and in the kitchen, the unwashed milk pot still gave off a burnt smell. Laura's mother headed to her daughter's house in the afternoon, knocked on the door with no response. Robert said curtly, "She needs quiet." The door closed, leaving the stunned mother on the damp porch. That evening, after a few more unanswered phone calls, the Morey family officially reported the missing person. The day after that, Robert Reed walked into the Manchester Township Police Station, his eyes sunken, his voice hoarse and tired. "My wife left the day before, hasn't contacted me. I think something's wrong." News of Laura Morey and her 6-month-old son's disappearance spread quickly throughout Manchester Township, the small town nestled between pine forests and the quiet Toms River. Local police launched a search operation immediately upon receiving the report. Patrol cars lined up and left the station, flashing lights cutting through the misty morning fog. Residents in the area were surprised and buzzing, as no one could believe a young mother like Laura could suddenly vanish with her son, without telling anyone. The rescue team fanned out in multiple directions. One group combed the neighborhood where the Reed house stood, another waded through wet grass and trails leading into the woods. A helicopter circled overhead, shining searchlights along the river and nearby lakes. Below, bloodhounds sniffed through every bush, but aside from the smells of gasoline and rotting wood, nothing else turned up. Officers rechecked the house, noting that belongings were largely intact, missing only Laura's purse and Ethan's blanket. On the kitchen table, the unwashed milk pot remained, and on the porch, the mud-caked baby stroller. Everything suggested the mother had left the house in a hurry, or been forced to go by someone. Laura's family gathered outside the house. Her mother trembled, answering police questions while clutching a photo of her daughter. She insisted Laura would never abandon her child, let alone leave without telling her. A few neighbors came to console, saying they had still seen Laura pushing the stroller along the main road the previous morning, looking tired, but still smiling, and waving to everyone. No one had seen her after that. The search expanded. Police set up a temporary command post in the woods along the river, pitching tents for rest areas. Volunteers, mostly locals and church groups, divided into teams to scour the roadside woods, lakes, and empty lots near the industrial area. They posted flyers with photos of Laura and baby Ethan on utility poles, gas stations and stores. Everyone hoped for a miracle, that the young mother was just hiding out due to family issues. A few days later, a forest ranger checking an area near Route 70 discovered an abandoned blue car hidden in the brush. The car was thick with dust, its rear wheels sunk into the ground, the driver's side door slightly ajar. When police arrived, they confirmed it was Laura Morey's car. Inside, her purse lay on the front seat, wallet and papers still there. In the back seat, a baby blanket, an empty bottle, and a few plastic toys scattered around. The trunk was half open, containing only a damp blanket. No signs of struggle, no blood, no scuff marks. Lieutenant Connor, the case lead, bent down to examine the ground around it, and noticed strange tire tracks imprinted deeply in the damp soil behind the car. Large tire treads with deep grooves, like a material hauling truck. Those tracks circled around and disappeared onto a red dirt trail. He quietly noted in his log, "Tracks from second vehicle, unidentified." Robert Reed was called to the scene. He appeared calm, staring at the car for a long moment before saying, "She often drove off somewhere when she was upset. Maybe she wanted to get away from here." When asked about the truck tire marks, he just shrugged. "I work construction, this area's full of trucks. Probably nothing special." His demeanor irritated many, but police had no reason to suspect him yet. The first press conference was held at the station parking lot. The spokesperson stated they were considering the possibility that Laura had left voluntarily or had an accident. "No signs of foul play at this time," he said curtly. This theory quickly spread through the town. Some believed Laura was under pressure from a strained marriage, that she just needed time to think. But the Morey family objected vehemently. Her mother said, "My girl would never leave without taking her son. She loved him more than her own life." As police gathered more statements, the search teams continued probing along the forest roads. Wind rustled through the pines, carrying the chirping of insects and the scent of damp earth. The hastily printed flyers began to fade, edges curling from night dew. No new clues emerged. The tire tracks were gradually erased by rain, and everything returned to its previous quiet, leaving only the forgotten car in the woods as a cold piece of evidence. When the search wrapped up at week's end, Lieutenant Connor gathered the files, his voice lowering. "No victim found. Vehicle recovered, working hypothesis, voluntary departure or accident." He knew he didn't believe those words himself. A mother couldn't vanish in the middle of the night, with her 6-month-old without leaving any trace. Manchester Township sank back into heavy silence, the silence of a place holding something back that everyone feared to face. When Laura's car was towed to the police station lot, the disappearance, once thought simple, began to take on a different hue. Lieutenant Connor requested Robert Reed return for a formal interrogation. He arrived in the morning, wearing a plaid shirt, hands in pockets, looking tired but not panicked. In the room, dim light shone down on the metal table as Connor opened his notebook, voice steady. "When was the last time you saw your wife?" Robert hesitated, then replied, "That evening. She left after we argued. I couldn't stop her." Connor pressed, "Did she say where she was going?" "No, she just said she needed some air." The answer floated by lightly, but to the lieutenant's eye, it rang like an incomprehensible void. Robert's statement conflicted with many details in the reports. He had told neighbors that Laura took Ethan to her mother's, but Laura's mother insisted she hadn't seen her daughter or the child. Moreover, her car was found nearly 10 miles from home, while Robert insisted I didn't leave the house that night. Connor asked, "Are you sure you didn't hear the car start, or headlights leaving?" Robert replied, eyes down on the table, "I was in the living room. She might have slipped out the back quietly." When asked why he didn't report it right away, he just said, "I thought she was mad. She'd come back." Investigators cross-checked Robert's timeline with witness accounts. Neighbor Jackie Alvarez, who lived across the street, clearly remembered around 9 p.m. hearing a large engine and headlights sweeping through the Reeds' living room window. "It wasn't Laura's car," she said. "The light was higher and yellower, like a truck." Another Mr. Caldwell at the end of the street said he saw a beige truck drive slowly through the neighborhood and disappear toward the woods road. When questioned again, Robert denied, "I didn't see anything. I was inside." No one could confirm he was really there at that time. Police searched the house again, this time more thoroughly. No blood, no signs of struggle, but in the living room, the fabric-covered chair had a fresh tear, and on the floor, small ceramic shards, matching the broken vase out front. Connor examined closely, noting it in the report. In the kitchen, a cabinet door had a small dent, as if struck hard. Though each detail was minor, together they painted a picture of a fierce argument, not a peaceful parting. That afternoon, Connor took Robert to the wood scene where the car was found. Staring at the abandoned Ford, he stood still, his gaze inscrutable. "I don't know why she'd drive in here," Robert said slowly. "Maybe someone met her on the road." That remark caught the lieutenant's attention. Someone, meaning he'd considered the possibility of a third party, but hadn't mentioned it in prior questioning. Connor probed, "Do you have any friends with a truck?" Robert answered, "Lots of my coworkers do. We do construction. Every truck has marks like that." He gave a strained smile, but it didn't fool the man across from him. In the following days, police interviewed Robert's coworkers one by one. Most described him as quiet, reserved, sometimes hot-tempered. One worker said that a few days before Laura's disappearance, Robert had borrowed a material hauling truck to move family stuff. That detail was noted, but the owner said he'd parked it at the site that night, unused by anyone. No concrete evidence to charge him. Everything remained mere suspicion. In the papers, the story gradually lost heat. The last article ended with a small line, "No new developments in the disappearance of Laura Morey and her son." Police, per procedure, temporarily classified the case as missing persons, no signs of crime. Connor disagreed, but the file had to be closed until new leads emerged. The small town began to settle into a quiet unease. Coffee shop conversations all ended with the same question: where did she go? Some whispered that Laura might have fled a bad marriage. Others believed Robert was hiding something. At church, candles were still lit in prayer. Laura's photo hung before the altar, wilted daisies fading. The Morey family lived in waiting and doubt, while Robert still went to the site each morning, silent as if nothing had happened. Whenever asked, he repeated one line: "She needs quiet." Lieutenant Connor kept a copy of the case file on his desk amid stacks of others. He believed the story wasn't over, just shrouded in deliberate silence. But at that moment, no one knew that in the quiet night of Manchester Township, those strange tire tracks would haunt the town for years to come. The following spring, when the woods along the Manasquan River had just turned green again after the first seasonal rains, Laura Morey's disappearance seemed buried in the town's memory of Manchester. The missing person posters peeled from telephone poles, the words missing mother and infant blurred by sun and wind. Only Laura's mother still came regularly to the church, lighting candles and praying for her daughter and the small grandchild who had never been found. On a damp morning, in a wooded area more than 30 miles from Manchester, a fisherman along the riverbank noticed a strange foul smell wafting in the air. As he followed it to a muddy clearing near a shallow bend in the river, he saw the ragged edge of a tarp protruding from the layer of decayed leaves. He bent down and lifted it gently, and immediately recoiled as the stench of death rushed up. Beneath the damp tarp was a human body part, tightly wrapped in multiple layers of construction sheeting. New Jersey State Police quickly cordoned off the area. Under the dew-soaked canopy of trees, forensic technicians peeled back each layer of fabric. The body was that of a woman, heavily decomposed, with only hair and a few patches of clothing fabric clinging to the skin. No identification papers, no personal items, just a tarnished silver bracelet on the left wrist, engraved with the faint letters, E.M. That small detail made Lieutenant Connor, who had once handled Laura's case, freeze. He clearly remembered from the missing persons file that Laura had a silver bracelet engraved with her son's initials, Ethan Morey. The victim was transported to the Trenton Identification Lab. Preliminary results: female, late 20s to early 30s, about 5 inches tall, long brown hair. The body was too decomposed for visual identification, but the bone structure and height matched Laura's profile. The forensic report determined the victim had been struck hard on the head, then strangled to death. No signs of resistance, possibly unconscious before death. Estimated time of death, 8 to 9 months prior, matching the time of Laura's disappearance. Connor reviewed the crime scene photos. The tarp used to wrap the body was the type specialized for construction, stained with streaks of white cement dust. Some short, light-colored hairs were mixed in that didn't belong to the victim. He noted in his log, construction materials, possible local source. The press ran stories simultaneously about the mysterious body along the Manasquan River. Local papers printed photos of the woods with the headline, "Woman's Body Found, Identity Unknown." Manchester buzzed with talk again. Some said it was a lost hiker, others brought up the name they'd once tried to forget, Laura Morey. Laura's family was invited to Trenton for identification. Her mother recognized the silver bracelet in the photo. That's it. She wore it since Ethan was born. She burst into tears, but police still needed dental records to verify. Robert Reed was also summoned. He arrived late, looking exhausted, and said he'd never seen the bracelet before. Lots of people have ones like that. Connor didn't respond, just quietly took notes. He knew from the wedding photos that Laura had worn that exact bracelet. Dental records confirmed the victim was Laura Morey. Police immediately reopened the file, but the child wasn't at the scene. No bone fragments, clothing, or infant footprints within a 1-mile radius. Connor wrote in the report, "Child missing, presumed alive or relocated." The body was logged in the forensics database as Jane Doe #NJ801042, until legal formalities were complete. Laura's family held a small service at St. Mary's Church. No casket, just a photo and white flowers. Her mother sat in the front pew, clutching her rosary beads tightly, her eyes fixed on the smiling photo of her daughter, as if she couldn't believe it was the end of the search. Connor returned to the riverside scene that afternoon, after police had cleared out. He stood silently in the muddy clearing, watching the slow-flowing water and the overcast sky. Old truck tire tracks were still imprinted on the path, the only trace leading back to the past he couldn't shake. The body was buried at the state cemetery, with a metal plaque etched with the cold words, Jane Doe NJ8042, found near Manasquan River, 1981. A river breeze blew through, carrying the scent of mud and the snap of breaking branches. Connor knew it wasn't over. The woman had finally been found, but the child, and the truth, were still out there somewhere, hidden like the river silently winding through the woods, carrying unspoken secrets. The Trenton Forensics Lab was housed in an old brick building, where fluorescent lights cast everything in a cold gray hue. The woman's body found along the Manasquan River was transported here immediately after the on-site examination was complete. Technicians in white coats worked in silence, carefully documenting every remaining detail. The autopsy results were released. Cause of death was traumatic brain injury combined with asphyxiation. The skull had a fracture from a heavy blow with a hard object, and neck ligature marks indicated direct deep pressure, not an accident. No stab wounds or gunshot residue, indicating the victim died quickly in a confined space. Forensics confirmed the time of death aligned with Laura Morey's disappearance period, transferring the Jane Doe NJ8042 file to the state level for investigation. Evidence was collected and catalogued: hair samples, bone fragments, the tarp wrapping the body, and the silver bracelet engraved EM. Everything was sealed in metal boxes, labeled, and stored separately. Under the microscope, scratches on the bracelet showed it had endured heavy impact, possibly during a struggle. In the folds of the tarp, technicians found fine white dust particles. Preliminary analysis identified it as Type B Portland cement powder, common in civilian construction projects in Ocean County. That detail caught Lieutenant Connor's attention. Robert Reed, Laura's husband, was a construction worker who had handled this material all summer the previous year. Connor contacted a building materials supplier near Toms River. They confirmed sales of tarp with matching production codes to the recovered sample, but the tarp was widely distributed and couldn't serve as incriminating evidence. In his notes, Connor jotted, "Materials match victim's husband's occupational area, monitor." The era's limitations stalled the investigation further. DNA technology didn't exist yet. Analysis was limited to fiber comparisons, chemical structures, and microscopic traces. A light-colored hair found in the tarp layers couldn't be traced to anyone. Forensics could only note, not ruling out contamination during construction. All they had were scattered pieces of evidence, enough to raise suspicion but not to convict. Connor stood in the hallway watching technicians pack the evidence into boxes. Each was labeled, Jane Doe NJ8042, Evidence Storage, Trenton. The bold black print gleamed coldly under the lights, reflecting the silver glint from the EM engraved bracelet. He knew he'd hit the limit. No witnesses, no tracks, no scientific tools to prove it. The report sent to the state concluded briefly, victim unidentified, no evidence for charges, file on hold. Connor read that line and pursed his lips. He felt every detail pointed to one name, but the era lacked the means to prove it. In the filing system, the case was moved to pending, awaiting action. The body was buried at the state cemetery, while evidence was taken to the basement cold storage. The box holding the silver bracelet was placed in locker 14's corner, beside hundreds of others. Per procedure, Connor signed the storage log, then closed the book. He looked at the EM inscription one last time, sensing these inanimate objects would one day speak. Months later, he left the investigations unit, but kept a copy of the file in his personal drawer. Each year, he returned to the storage once to check the seals, adding a small note in his log. No progress. For others, the case was closed. For him it was just dormant. The Jane Doe NJ8042 file was officially archived at year's end. The summary report, typed on a typewriter, ended coldly. Insufficient data to continue investigation. In a dim corner of Trenton's storage, the metal box holding the silver bracelet, tarp, and hair fragment, lay silent, waiting for a new generation of investigators, and an era where science could give voice to the dead. After the Jane Doe NJ801042 file was closed, all interest faded away. The press ran only a short blurb. New Jersey State Police say the identity of the woman found along the Manasquan River remains undetermined. No photos, no mention of the prior disappearance, just a quick fade into weather reports and spring fair news. In Trenton's archives, the evidence box sat motionless in cold storage, its seal label yellowing. To the warehouse staff, it was just another string of numbers, NJ801042, like countless others. To Lieutenant Connor, it was still an unfilled void. Occasionally he'd stop by to sign the check-in log, his eyes lingering longer on the silver bracelet engraved with EM, the only thing reminding him of the nameless woman wrapped in tarp by the river. In Manchester Township, the small house where Laura once lived was sold to a new family. They repainted the walls, replaced the fence, erasing every old trace. Robert Reed left town right after police wrapped up, taking minimal luggage and proceeds from the house sale. Folks said he moved to Delaware, taking a job at a civilian construction firm. No one asked more, and no one wanted to revisit the old story. His absence quickly dissolved the suspicion around the disappearance, as if the town wanted to forget it all had ever happened. The Morey family couldn't. Laura's mother still went to St. Mary's Church weekly, lighting candles and praying for her daughter and the small grandchild, never found. She believed that body was Laura's, and that Ethan was still alive somewhere. Each year, on the child's birthday, she'd place a small candle on the dining table, whispering, "My grandson is still safe." That fragile faith was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Connor visited her once, bringing a photocopy of the EM bracelet photo for identity confirmation. She stared at it a long time, then said softly, "That's my daughter's. But no one believes me." He didn't know what to say, just bowed his head in apology. Back home, he added to his notebook, "Victim's family affirms identity, no legal basis to reopen." Time passed, and those involved in the investigation were reassigned one by one. The case file was shelved at the bottom rack, buried among hundreds of unsolved cases. Crime scene photos, autopsy reports, witness statements yellowed with age. The name Laura Morey vanished from coffee shop chats, local news bulletins, echoing only in her mother's whispered prayers. A year later, word came that Robert had remarried in Delaware to a younger woman. He rented a small apartment near job sites, living quietly. In paperwork, he didn't list prior wife or child. To those around him, he was just a taciturn widower from out of state. In his new life, the past was buried like cement over a foundation, smooth, cold, undisturbed. Back in Manchester, the small room that had been Ethan's was kept intact. The wooden crib, a few worn stuffed animals, the photo of Laura holding her baby, all covered with a white sheet. When asked, Laura's mother would only say, "They're not back yet." To her, no evidence proved death. To police, the file had gone cold, forgotten amid bigger cases. Connor retired not long after. In his home desk drawer, he kept the sole photocopy of the EM bracelet photo, carefully folded in an envelope. Sometimes, while cleaning, he'd pause to stare at it a long time, then tuck it away, telling no one. For him, the case had never truly closed. Time marched on, dusting everything. In Trenton's basement storage, the NJ801042 evidence box sat amid rows of other metal ones, its paper label faded yellow, cold storage lights, casting a pallid glow on the faint, EM engraving. No one remembered whose it was anymore, nor imagined that one day, those inanimate evidence fragments would awaken a case thought forever dormant. The case's final state file notation, identity undetermined. No suspect, no progress. A red stamp sealed it shut. The small town returned to quiet, and the name Laura Morey, or Jane Doe, #NJ801042, lingered only as a cold line in the archives, a vanished mother, an unnamed body, and a child never found. Many years have passed since the day the body of Jane Doe NJ811042 was buried, and the evidence box containing samples of hair, bone, tarpaulin fabric, and a silver bracelet engraved with EM still sits quietly in the cold storage of the Trenton State Police. The label has yellowed. The sealing tape has dried out. To the new employees, it's just a number among hundreds of other anonymous files. The 1980s decade passed, and the case gradually faded from everyone's memory. Lieutenant Connor retired, leaving a note in the report, suspended, awaiting scientific advances. That notation became a quiet prophecy for what would come 2 decades later. No one mentioned the woman wrapped in tarpaulin along the Manasquan River anymore, or the child who was never found. By the mid-1990s, DNA technology began to be discussed in industry meetings, but the testing costs were too high, reserved only for major cases with specific suspects. Old files like Jane Doe 81 remained quietly in cold storage, waiting for a reason to be reopened. Trenton at that time was changing slowly. A group of young technicians was assigned the task of inventorying all evidence before digitizing the data. In that list, the line NJ811042 was circled in red, only because it was approaching the destruction deadline per regulations. No one expected that this would inadvertently keep the case from disappearing forever. In 1999, the U.S. Department of Justice launched Project Identify, a nationwide project to recover and digitize biological samples from unsolved missing persons and homicide cases. Forensic labs across the country simultaneously reopened their storage vaults, extracting DNA samples to enter into the new database called CODIS, Combined DNA Index System. It was seen as a turning point in modern investigation. New Jersey's State Forensics Lab also joined the program. During an inventory session, a young technician named Miller opened the metal box labeled Jane Doe NJ811042. He knew nothing about the case, only that the file noted female victim, unidentified. Miller carefully removed a hair strand still intact with root cells at the base, placed it into a plastic test tube, labeled it with the identification code, and sent it to the central lab in Quantico, Virginia. There, the victim's DNA sequence was successfully extracted. The data was encoded and entered into the CODIS system, where millions of comparison samples from across the states were automatically scanned. The screen ran through hundreds of code lines, then stopped with a short message: "No match found." There were no matching results, not in the missing persons list, not in criminal data, not in any genetic records. The report sent back to Trenton was just one page: DNA sample processed. No suitable matches. File remains as is. The evidence box was resealed, a new sticker added, noting the 1999 testing date, and placed back on the cold metal shelf. No one realized that this small action, taking a hair strand and storing the DNA code, had inadvertently preserved evidence for the next generation of investigators. That same year, Project Identify was praised in the press as a major advance in American forensic science. But in the Trenton basement, the Jane Doe 81 case was still just an old iron box that no one opened. No news story mentioned the woman's name, nor was there any match that evoked her fate. Only in the internal log, next to the file code, was there a short note from the technician: DNA sample extracted. Negative result. Time stepped into the new millennium, and everything changed rapidly. Paper files were digitized, cold storage replaced by automated systems. The old evidence boxes were moved to a separate storage row labeled pre-DNA cases. Among them, the box numbered NJ811042 retained its position at the end of the hallway. No one knew that inside, that thin hair strand was still intact, the DNA of an anonymous woman still waiting. And one day, when science was strong enough, it would speak, reviving a case thought buried for 2 decades. 31 years after the Jane Doe NJ811042 file was forgotten in Trenton's cold storage, another story began on the other side of the Pacific. In Honolulu, Hawaii, Ethan Reed, 31 years old, worked as an IT engineer for a software company along the Ala Moana coast. His life was peaceful, tidy, and without a past, because he didn't know where he came from. Ethan had been adopted as a child in New Jersey, with records stating, abandoned child, unknown relatives. His adoptive parents died early. He lived alone, trying to forget the vague blanks in his memory. In 2011, Ethan and his Japanese-American girlfriend were preparing to adopt a child. While checking legal information on missingkids.gov, he happened to pause at a photo with the caption, Ethan Morey, missing from Manchester Township, New Jersey, 19. The age progression photo simulating the face of the missing child at age 31, and the person in it resembled him eerily. The hair, the features, the faint scar above the left eyebrow, everything like a reflection in the mirror. Ethan briefly thought it was a coincidence, but upon reading closely, he saw the detail missing with mother Laura Morey, August 1980. That name made him shiver. A strange feeling crept into his mind, as if someone had just opened an old door in his memory. That night, he couldn't sleep. He opened and reopened the photo, looked in the mirror, then wondered, what if I am that child? The next morning, he called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. His voice trembled as he shared his suspicion. The hotline staffer responded gently, we can send a DNA testing kit, would you like to try? 3 days later, an envelope with the NCMEC logo arrived. Ethan quietly followed the instructions, swabbing his cheek lining and mailing it back. He didn't tell anyone, not even his girlfriend, just said it was a fun test, but in his heart, he knew it wasn't a joke. 2 weeks later, the phone rang while he was at work. On the line was a woman's voice from the NCMEC office in Washington. Mr. Reed, your DNA results are in. You should sit down. Ethan heard the ocean waves outside the window, his heart pounding. The woman spoke slowly, your DNA sample matches exactly with data from an unsolved case in New Jersey. You are Ethan Morey, missing since 1980, and the matching DNA is from your mother, Laura Morey. Ethan froze, all sounds vanished, leaving only the heavy beat of his heart in his chest. His mother, the woman he'd never seen, turned out to be Jane Doe NJ801042, the unidentified body discovered in 1981, stored in files for 3 decades. His entire life flipped upside down. The woman who gave birth to him had been murdered, while he was found, renamed, and raised in another family without anyone knowing. When the call ended, Ethan sat still in front of his computer screen, staring at the age progression photo with trembling hands. The child Ethan Morey, and the man Ethan Reed, were nearly identical. Now he understood why he always had fragmented memories, a voice lullabying, the smell of burnt milk, cries in the night. They weren't dreams, but remnants from before that fateful day in 1980. NCMEC offered to have him cooperate with New Jersey State Police to reopen the case. They explained that Jane Doe NJ801042, East DNA had been stored in the CODIS system since the late 1990s, and had just matched his sample. That meant the case, thought forever forgotten, was officially revived. Ethan was asked to sign an identity confirmation statement, but he couldn't speak. That evening, he walked along Waikiki Beach, watching waves crash on the rocks. Everything he'd believed, his name, childhood, origins, collapsed. He didn't know where to start learning about his mother, or about who killed her. In his mind, only one question lingered, why am I still alive? He returned home, turned on the light, looked around the tidy apartment he'd always been proud of. For the first time he saw it as terrifyingly empty. He opened his computer, searched Laura Morey, 1980 New Jersey. Old articles popped up, woman and infant son missing, unidentified body along Manasquan River. No identification. At the end of one article, he saw a photo of the silver bracelet engraved EM, the initials of his and his mother's names. Ethan stared at that photo for a long time. He suddenly realized that everything he had, his peaceful life, the chance to be a father, began with a tragedy he'd never known. He took a deep breath, then opened his email to draft a message to NCMEK. I'm ready to cooperate with New Jersey State Police. I want to know what happened to my mother. Offshore, the night wind blew strong, carrying mist and salt. On the screen, the missing child, New Jersey 1980 photo still glowed, as if looking back at him from the past. And in that moment, not only was Ethan Reed's identity revealed, but the smoldering flame for 31 years in the Jane Doe #NJ801042 file also blazed back to life, ready to drag the entire state of New Jersey into an investigation no one anticipated. At the Cold Case Unit headquarters in Trenton, an ordinary morning was shattered by the long ring of the fax machine. A report sheet printed out, bold title, Jane Doe #NJ801042, possible DNA match. The veteran investigators exchanged glances, stunned. That file had slept quietly for over 30 years. The report from Quantico stated concisely, DNA sample from Ethan Reed, residing in Honolulu, Hawaii, shows direct mother-son blood relation to the victim in the Jane Doe 1981 case. The cold words were enough to make the room fall into absolute silence. After 31 years, the nameless woman along the Manasquan River finally had a real name, Laura Maury. The investigation team leader, Captain Frank Walters, assigned the case to Detective Maria DeSantis, a young but seasoned female investigator. She had a personal reason. Her father had been an officer on the original 1981 investigation team. In his journal, Maria had once read a faded line, Jane Doe 81, a poor woman who should have been identified. Now his daughter was given the chance to fulfill that promise. Maria began by reopening the Trenton evidence vault. In the old metal box were the cement-stained tarpaulin, hair strands, bone fragments, and the silver bracelet engraved, E.M. She looked at them for a long time, feeling as if the woman was present in the cold room. When cross-referencing with the 1980 missing persons file from Manchester Township, everything matched perfectly. Laura Maury, 27 years old, disappeared with her 6-month-old son named Ethan. Maria pinned a photo of Laura Maury next to Ethan's age progression photo on the investigation board. The two faces were strikingly similar. She understood, if the DNA confirmed the mother-son relationship, the homicide case was officially reopened. But the bigger question remained, if the mother was dead, who took the child away, and why? She reread the old transcripts. Laura's body had been struck hard on the head, and strangled with a soft object, with no signs of robbery or assault. Forensics concluded the perpetrator could be someone she knew. At the time, her husband, Robert Reed, had been suspected, but police lacked evidence. Robert left town right after the incident and vanished in the mid-1980s. Maria returned to the old scene in Manchester. The Reeds' house had been demolished, leaving only a concrete foundation and overgrown trees. The only surviving neighbor, an old woman named Helen Park, recounted, "I remember that night well. There was arguing, crashing sounds, then silence. The next morning, he said his wife had taken the baby and left, but I never believed it." Her account matched the 1980 interrogation transcript exactly, the only evidence overlooked. Back at the office, Maria spread the files across the table. A red arrow connected Manchester to Manasquan, a 30-mile route. In the meeting, she said, Laura didn't go there on her own. Someone drove her, killed her, and hid the body. Meanwhile, the baby was taken in the opposite direction. The investigation team reviewed social services records from 1980, 1981. In Newark they found an old report, infant left at religious facility doorstep, male, about 1 year old, healthy, no papers. That notation strangely matched Ethan's age. From there, the child was transferred to social services and vanished into the adoption system. Maria frowned. The perpetrator killed the mother but spared the child. For what reason? She listed contacts with Laura before her disappearance, co-workers at the post office, a few old friends, and her husband, Robert Reed. That name was circled in red on the board. When sending a request for civil records search, the result stunned her. A man named Robert Ellis, same birth date, living in Wilmington, Delaware, owner of a small construction company. The Ellis surname only appeared from 1984, 3 years after Laura's body was found. The traces matched the occupation and work address of Robert Reed from years ago. Maria stared at the computer screen, a chill running down her spine. If that was indeed Robert Reed, he had lived for 30 years under a different name, while the murder of his wife and disappearance of his son had never truly been closed. But what troubled her more was the missing piece. How did the child end up in Newark and get legally adopted without raising suspicion? That evening, the office was empty except for her. In front of her were 2 photos, Laura Morey and Ethan Reed, mother and son faces, 2 generations connected across 3 decades. Maria turned on the desk lamp, opened the file, and wrote the first note of the new investigation. May 21, 2011, Jane Doe, #NJ801042 file reopened. Victim identified as Laura Morey. Blood relation matches Ethan Reed, Hawaii. File status, homicide, active. Key question, who killed Laura Morey, and who took her son out of state? She signed it and closed the file folder. The lamplight cast on Laura's photo, the woman's eyes seeming to look straight at her, both pained and pleading. 31 years of silence had ended. The Laura Morey case was officially alive again, and with it, her father's old promise, one day, that Jane Doe will be called by her real name. Since the Laura Morey case was reopened, Detective Maria DeSantis has practically lived in the cold case unit office. She focused on one single question: how did a missing child from New Jersey become Ethan Reed in Hawaii? The answer lay somewhere in the dusty files over 3 decades old. Maria contacted the Federal Social Services Bureau (USDA's) to check adoption records. After many days, she received a response. Ethan was admitted to Queens Medical Center, Honolulu, in the fall of 1981, the same year Laura's body was discovered. The record only stated, "Child handed over by an anonymous couple, no documents provided." That line was like a strange void. She requested a copy of the night shift log from that night. In the report, the nurse wrote, "Around 2 a.m., a blonde woman and a man wearing a light blue work shirt carried a boy about 1 year old. They said they couldn't raise the child, left the baby, and hurried away." The description "light blue work shirt" sent a chill down Maria's spine. That was the type of construction worker shirt that Robert Reed, Laura's husband, often wore. She sent a request to the FBI to re-examine the fingerprints still preserved on the paper bag the couple left at the hospital. The report came back. The fingerprints were faint, but matched 12 characteristic points with Robert Reed, who now lives under the name Robert Ellis in Delaware. The probability of a random match was nearly 0. The evidence had emerged. Robert had been in Hawaii, where the child was left behind. Maria continued to expand the investigation. By tracing immigration and cargo transport data, she discovered that Reed left New Jersey just weeks after Laura disappeared, then appeared at the San Diego port under the alias R. Ellis, working on a ship carrying materials to Honolulu. At the same time, a blonde woman named Nancy Carr, who had been a cashier for a local construction company, suddenly quit after that shipment. Everything matched. Maria wrote in the report, "High likelihood, Robert Reed killed his wife, took the child and his mistress, and fled the state. In Hawaii, he abandoned the child to erase traces, but she needed more witness evidence to confirm. She flew to Honolulu. The city was warm, golden sun stretching along the sandy shore. In contrast to the peaceful beauty was her cold objective. At Queens Medical Center, she met veteran nurse Leilani Okada, who had been on night duty that night. When Maria showed Robert Reed's photo, the woman immediately froze. "I remember him. He had eyes," panicked. "When I asked the child's name, he said, Ethan, voice trembling, but certain. Maria was stunned. The killer of Laura had kept the child's name, like an indelible mark of guilt. In the old duty log, Leilani had handwritten another detail. The man was carrying a construction hard hat. The woman had a scar on her right cheek. That scar matched the description of a witness who had seen Robert Ellis's new wife in Delaware in 1984. The pieces of the past began to fit together perfectly. Maria returned to Trenton, presented all the evidence to Captain Walters. He pondered. 30 years ago, he left the state with the child, leaving his wife's body behind. Now everything is clear. The investigation team obtained a search warrant for Robert Ellis's home in Wilmington, Delaware. In the basement, they found an old wooden box containing wedding photos of Robert and Laura, a cargo ship ticket to Honolulu, in the name of R. Reed, and a baby bracelet engraved with E. Identical to the inscription on the silver bracelet found with Laura's body. Everything was like a silent confession. As Maria prepared to finalize the prosecution file, Delaware police reported Robert Ellis had just been rushed to the hospital after a severe stroke. He was still alive, but in a deep coma. The only interrogation now lay in the blur between life and death. Maria looked at the report, feeling both satisfied and bitter. The case had finally been revealed, but justice might come too late. She thought of Ethan, the son who had just rediscovered his true identity, unaware that the biological father he had longed to meet was the one who had killed his mother. Before ending the workday, she sat alone in the office, opened the old evidence box. The silver bracelet, EM, gleamed under the yellow light. She wrote the final line in the minutes, confirmed Robert Reed. Ellis left New Jersey at the time Laura Maury was murdered, appeared in Hawaii with his new girlfriend, abandoned his son at Queens Medical Center. Fingerprints match completely, purpose to erase all traces of the crime. She closed the file, looked out the window. The Trenton sky was drizzling lightly, just like the night Laura disappeared. But this time, the past was no longer silent. Mother and child, two names once separated, had finally been reunited, and the one who had buried them for 30 years had been exposed, even if he might never hear the sentence for himself. After gathering enough evidence about Robert Reed's escape journey, Detective Maria DeSantis still felt a piece was missing. All the data, documents, fingerprints confirmed he was the perpetrator. But she needed a witness, a voice that had seen the night Laura disappeared. In the original 1980 file, Maria found the name Jackie Alvarez, neighbor across the street. At the time, Jackie was 37, working as a waitress at a diner near Route 70. The interrogation record only noted briefly, heard nothing noteworthy. Intuition made Maria suspicious. After a few calls, she learned Jackie was now 70, living with her daughter in the small town of Toms River. Maria visited her on a chilly morning. The small wooden house was by the woods, the porch hung with old orchid pots. Jackie opened the door, slender figure, white hair, eyes still bright. When she heard the name Laura Maury, she froze, hands gripping the railing tightly. "What did you just say?" Her voice trembled. Maria showed her badge and said, "I'm the investigator in charge of Laura's case from 1980. A long silence. Finally, Jackie invited her in, poured tea, and sat down, eyes lost in space. 30 years, she whispered. I thought no one would mention it again. Jackie recounted that night. She came home late, the air humid. I heard arguing from Laura's house, then things falling, then silence. She paused, took a deep breath. A few minutes later, I saw yellow lights shining straight through the window, truck lights, very bright. I've lived my whole life near construction sites. I know the engine roar. That truck stopped in front of Laura's door, then drove toward the woods road. Later, when I heard she was missing, I knew what I'd seen, but I didn't dare say." Maria looked straight at her. "Are you sure it was a truck?" Jackie nodded, eyes teary. "I still hear that engine in my dreams." After a silence, she stood up, went into the room, and returned with a faded paper envelope. "I've kept this all those years. Maybe now I should give it to you." Inside was an old Polaroid photo. Laura Maury holding her son in the living room, smiling radiantly. But in the mirror behind, reflected Robert Reed leaning against the wall, his face with a long scratch on the left cheek, still bleeding. The inscription on the back, August 1980, before Ethan's birthday. Maria put on gloves, examined the photo under the light. That wound matched perfectly with the detail in the autopsy report. Under the victim's fingernails, there was male skin tissue and cells. Now she knew, Laura had fought back, scratched the perpetrator's face before being killed. "Mrs. Jackie," Maria asked, "why didn't you give this photo to the police?" Jackie bowed her head, voice choked. "I was scared." A few days later, he came to my house, asked if I'd heard anything. His eyes were bloodshot, hand bandaged. I lied that I didn't know anything. He looked at me for a long time before leaving. I lived alone, I was afraid he'd come back. Maria was stunned. That fear was why the whole town had been silent for 30 years. Mrs. Jackie gently wiped her tears. "Laura once told me she wanted to leave, but was afraid she couldn't raise the child. I wish I'd had the courage to help her then." Maria packaged the Polaroid into an evidence bag, sealed it. "You've done enough," she said. "Thanks to you, the case can be closed properly." Jackie took her hand, whispered, "If you meet Laura's son, tell him his mother fought to the end. She never abandoned her child." On the way back to Trenton, Maria drove in the rain. The image of Laura and the baby in the photo kept appearing in her mind. The truck lights casting on the wall that night, Robert's face full of blood, all the scattered pieces had finally fit together. At the cold case office, she laid the photo under the yellow light. Laura's eyes in the photo still shone, as if pleading across time. Maria wrote the final note. Witness statement from Jackie Alvarez confirms truck lights at the scene on the night of disappearance. Polaroid photo captures wound on Robert Reed's face, matching skin tissue found under victim's fingernails. Witness silent, due to threats. Evidence strengthens conclusion. Robert Reed is the perpetrator. She folded the file, leaned back in the chair. Outside, the rain had stopped, only slow drops falling on the window frame. After more than 3 decades, a final witness had spoken, and the forgotten woman, Laura Maury, had finally been given back her own voice. 2 days after Jackie Alvarez's statement, Detective Maria DeSantis went to Wilmington, Delaware to confront Robert Reed directly, now 66 years old, the man who had lived 3 decades under the alias Robert Ellis. He was recovering from a stroke, allowed to meet the investigator in a private room at St. Francis Hospital. Robert sat silently on the chair, face gaunt, eyes cloudy. When Maria introduced herself, he looked at her, voice hoarse. "I don't know anyone named Laura Maury." Maria placed the wedding photo, marriage certificate, and Polaroid in front of him. "You know her very well. Laura was your wife, and this is the scratch on your cheek, matching the skin tissue found under her fingernails." Robert glanced at the photo, eyes wavering then turning away. "She left. I didn't kill anyone." Maria didn't look away. "What about your fingerprints at the Honolulu hospital? Or the missing child, being abandoned, right when you were in Hawaii?" The air thickened. He swallowed hard, then said, "I've never been to Hawaii." Maria calmly opened new documents. "Your DNA sample matches Ethan Reed completely. The child left there. You are his biological father." Robert trembled slightly, eyes widening. "He is alive." "He is. And it was Ethan who sent the DNA that reopened the case." Maria looked at him, voice slow. "He wants to know what really happened to his mother." Robert was silent. Wind from the small window made the curtain rustle. After a few minutes, he said softly, "I didn't mean to kill her. We argued. Laura said she wanted to leave, take the boy. I lost control. She fell, head hit the table. I was scared, so I buried her. Then I left." Maria looked straight at him, voice cold. The autopsy concluded it was a direct blow and strangulation marks, not an accident. Where did you stop on the way out? Manasquan, or where you buried her? Robert shook his head, avoiding her gaze. I don't remember, everything is blurry. And the child? He swallowed with difficulty. I took him with me. I thought I could raise him, but then, I couldn't handle it. She, the woman with me, said to leave him at the hospital. I agreed. The blonde woman with the scar on her right cheek. Maria pressed. Robert was silent, then nodded slightly. Nancy, she helped me, but didn't know about Laura. I lied, that my wife had died. Maria clearly sensed the contradiction in his words, both guilt and fear. She continued, why Hawaii? Why not stay on the mainland? Robert breathed heavily, eyes cloudy. I wanted to disappear. That place was far. No one knew who I was. I just wanted to start over. Maria gathered the files. You did. A new life on the body of your old wife and the abandoned child. He bowed his head, voice weakening. I just wanted to keep the boy safe. Laura was weak. She wouldn't have made it. Wouldn't have made it. Or were you afraid she would leave you? Maria asked, eyes cold. Robert didn't answer. The room sank into silence. Maria looked at him, seeing the exhaustion, but also something else, as if he was still hiding a secret bigger than the murder. She said slowly, you have the right to remain silent, but the truth doesn't disappear. Laura Mori has been identified, and your son is waiting for justice for his mother. Robert looked up, voice choked. I didn't harm him, I swear. Maria paused before stepping out of the room. Maybe, but you let him live his whole life in lies. The door closed, leaving in the room the steady beep of the heart monitor. As she left the hospital hallway, Maria felt heavy in Robert's last glance. There was not only guilt, but also fear. Something in Hawaii, or someone, was still being deliberately hidden by him. And she knew, this investigation wasn't over yet. Early morning in mid-September, the sky over Delaware was blanketed in heavy gray clouds. After weeks of coordination, Detective Maria DeSantis received the official order, arrest Robert Reed, 66, the suspect in the 1980 murder case in Manchester Township, New Jersey. The takedown was set for the morning of September 17, 2011. At 6:30 a.m., 2 police cars from Delaware and New Jersey pulled up in front of the small house on the edge of Lum's Pond. Robert had just stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand. The loudspeaker blared coldly, Robert Reed, you are under arrest for first-degree murder. He froze, didn't run, just nodded slightly, and held out his hands. It's finally here, he murmured as the cuffs clicked on. By noon the media exploded. Headlines splashed across every news outlet, father arrested in 1980 cold case murder. Victim identified, after 31 years. The name of the small-town Manchester Township, once forgotten, was now flooding TV screens. Outside the police station, a crowd gathered. Some cried, others raged. A middle-aged woman told a reporter, I always thought he was a good man. Never imagined he could do something like that. Another objected, it might have just been an accident. Who knows? The community was split, half pitied him, the other half seethed. In Trenton, DeSantis held a brief press conference. Thanks to DNA technology and the efforts of the cold case unit, she said, victim Jane Doe 81 has been identified as Laura Mori, and suspect Robert Reed has been arrested in Delaware. She didn't mention Ethan Reed, but everyone understood. The long-lost son was the one who had unwittingly cracked the case open. In Honolulu, Ethan sat stunned in front of the TV screen. The image of the silver-haired man in the news, aged eyes, weary face, was the faint memory he had of his father. The anchor read, DNA confirms Robert Reed as the biological father of Ethan Reed, who inadvertently reopened the case of his mother's murder. Ethan turned off the TV. The room darkened, with only the distant sound of waves. In his hand was the Polaroid photo the police had sent, Laura holding him as a baby, her eyes gentle. He whispered, I found you, Mom, but I lost Dad forever. Back in Manchester, old memories resurfaced. Neighbors recounted hearing arguments, seeing Laura with bruises, but too afraid to intervene. An old friend said, Laura always talked about leaving, but she was scared she couldn't support the kid. Scattered fragments of memory pieced together a grim picture, a woman trapped between violence and fear, buried both literally and figuratively. In the press it was dubbed, the Forgotten Mother of New Jersey. Major papers republished the case file, true crime podcasts launched interview series, analytical articles proliferated. Some saw Robert as a monster, others pitied him for a life haunted by guilt. But for Maria, only one thing mattered, the truth. In the Delaware holding cell, Robert stayed silent. His public defender only said, "My client is cooperating." But when asked about the blonde woman who had appeared in Hawaii, Robert just replied softly, "It doesn't matter anymore. I just hope my son doesn't hate me." A few days later, Ethan got a call from DeSantis. Her voice was low, "We got him. The evidence matches perfectly." Ethan replied softly, "I don't know if I should feel relieved or empty." "Both," she said. "That's how it feels for people who find the truth after so long." As the news spread, police received hundreds of emails, letters, and calls from everywhere to the cold case unit. Folks said it gave them hope. No case was too old, no one truly forgotten. Late afternoon, light rain fell over the woods along the Manasquan River, where Laura's body had been found. A few locals brought flowers, placing them before a new wooden sign, "For Laura, you were never forgotten." In the Trenton office, DeSantis watched the news on a small screen. Footage of Robert Reed being led in handcuffs to a squad car, head bowed low. The ticker below read, "Justice 31 years delayed, finally delivered." She gently closed the file. Outside, the sky was overcast, but in her heart was a clear feeling. After more than 3 decades, the Jane Doe 81 case was no longer a shadow in the cold files. It had become proof that justice, though late, could still be found. After his arrest, Robert Reed was transferred to Trenton for formal interrogation. In the interview room, he looked frail, hands trembling slightly, but his eyes remained cold and weary. When Detective Maria DeSantis entered, the air in the room seemed to sag. She turned on the recorder, her voice steady. "Mr. Reed, we need to hear the whole story again from you." Robert stared down at the gleaming metal table. "Laura died in an accident," he said softly. "She wanted to leave, take the baby. I tried to stop her. We struggled. She fell, hit her head on the table. When I realized she wasn't breathing, I panicked. I buried her to cover it up." Maria stayed silent, letting him finish. Robert recounted that after burying Laura, he took Ethan and was helped by a woman to flee New Jersey. He said he didn't remember her name clearly, just Nancy or Nora, who worked at a clinic. She said she'd handle the paperwork, find a temporary place. "I just wanted to forget." However, when cross-checked against forensic evidence, the story quickly crumbled. The latest report from the New Jersey State Crime Lab confirmed Laura Morey died from strangulation, with marks of trauma on the trachea and hyoid bone, not an accident. Additionally, on the collar of the tarp wrapped around the body, DNA from another woman was found, not Laura, nor anyone in the family. Maria held the results in her hand, looking at him, her voice deliberate. "If it was just you, why is there female DNA on the evidence?" Robert went quiet. His eyes hardened, as if wrestling between silence and confession. "Maybe from the material seller," he said, voice choked. But Maria knew this tarp was industrial grade, distributed only to large construction sites, where Robert had worked, and where women were rarely present. The new DNA evidence shifted the case file. In the summary report, DeSantis noted, likelihood of a female accomplice in the body disposal. The question arose, who was this woman, and was she involved in getting the baby to Hawaii? The investigative team expanded the search, reviewing lists of people who left New Jersey in late 1980, and commercial flights, with passengers using aliases linked to Robert Ellis. Among them, one name stood out, Nancy Wilburn, 32, a nurse, who had worked at a women's clinic in Toms River, quitting abruptly at the end of 1980. She vanished, leaving no forwarding address. Tracing records to Hawaii, Maria's team discovered that at Honolulu General Hospital, where the child was abandoned in 1981, there was a nurse named Nancy W., matching the birth date and background. She worked a few months and disappeared in 1982. Internal notes simply stated, transferred no forwarding address. Maria flipped through the files, a chill running through her. If Nancy was truly the one who fled with Robert, then she hadn't just helped him escape, she had directly participated in the disposal and abandoning the child. In the next interrogation, she placed a photo of Nancy Wilburn in front of him. "Do you remember this woman?" Robert glanced briefly, then looked away. "No, I don't know her." Maria leaned back, eyes fixed on him. "Strange. She worked at a clinic near your construction site in 1980. You both left the state almost the same day, and the female DNA on the tarp matches a rare genetic marker, identical to samples from Nancy's belongings." He drew a long raspy breath, silent. When she thought he wouldn't answer, he murmured, almost exhaling, "She just helped me. I lied, and said Laura fell. She was scared, but still helped move the body. After that, I told her not to come back." Maria sat up straight, voice icy. "Helped you bury your wife, then took your son to Hawaii, and left him at a hospital. That's help." Robert didn't respond, his trembling hands flat on the table. "She didn't know. I said just drop the baby off. I didn't think she'd do that." The vague answer complicated the case further. When police contacted Hawaii records, they confirmed, Nurse Nancy W. indeed vanished in the summer of 1982. No paycheck cashed, no appearances in any state after. A hypothesis emerged. Nancy Wilburn may have changed identities, or died. The investigative team expanded analysis on the tarp and old hair fibers, modern DNA techniques, recovered traces once overlooked. Results: besides Robert and Laura, there was DNA from a third person, female, matching the genetic group of the woman named Nancy. The cold case unit chief held a brief press conference. "We believe Robert Reed did not act alone. The case shows signs of assistance, cover-up, and possible complicity in moving the victim from the scene." The community erupted again. Papers screamed headlines, "Cold case takes new turn. Who was the woman in the shadows?" Meanwhile, social media spread the Polaroid of Laura alongside Nancy W. like a fresh mystery. Ethan, from Hawaii, read the news and went still. He'd never heard his father mention anyone named Nancy. In his hazy memories, he only recalled a faint perfume scent, a woman's hands lifting him in a hospital hallway. Now it all pieced into a terrifying image. That person might be the one who abandoned him. Maria, after compiling all evidence, wrote in the final report, "High likelihood Robert Reed did not act alone. DNA from a woman matching Nurse Nancy Wilburn's genetic group was found on evidence. This individual may have assisted in body disposal and child transport to Hawaii." Medical records confirm Nancy disappeared in 1982, never located. The investigation's final conclusion: the Laura Mori case involved at least two people, Robert Reed and an unidentified female accomplice. Maria closed the file, eyes heavy. For her, justice for Laura had advanced a step, but the shadow of the remaining woman, Nancy, was still an unsolved question. And sometimes, in cold cases, it's the silent ones who hold the rest of the truth. On March 6, 2012, the Ocean County Superior Court in New Jersey was packed. After more than 30 years, the Jane Doe 81 case finally went to trial. Defendant Robert Reed, 67, appeared in an orange prison jumpsuit, gaunt, with snow-white hair. In the gallery below, Ethan Reed sat silently, eyes downcast, caught between justice and family pain. Prosecutor Michael Coleman opened with a firm, low voice, "Your Honor, this is a case buried by time for 31 years. Today, we are here to give a name back to a mother, and the truth to her son." On the screen, a photo of Laura Mori appeared, alongside a diagram of the Manasquan River crime scene. Coleman methodically presented the chain of evidence, DNA results confirming the victim as Laura, cement-stained tarp, matching the type from Robert's construction site, his DNA on the body-wrapping fabric, forged adoption records in Honolulu, bearing his fingerprints, and the Polaroid with the cheek scratch, matching skin under the victim's nails. This was no accident, Coleman said. This was murder, an intentional silencing of a woman who wanted to leave. Defense attorney Donald Avery rose to counter. No direct eyewitness. No one saw Robert Reed commit murder. All evidence is circumstantial. DNA, old memories, emotional assumptions. He's lived 30 crime-free years, raised a child, worked an honest job. Could a man like that be a killer? Coleman replied calmly, "We are not judging how he lived afterward, but what he did in 1980. The first witness took the stand, Jackie Alvarez, the neighbor who had stayed silent for 30 years. Petite, silver-haired, her voice trembled but resolute. I heard arguing, then truck headlights sweeping the window. I was scared, so I said nothing. But I can't let Laura be forgotten any longer." She pointed to the Polaroid and affirmed, "I've kept it since the day she vanished. And now, I want justice to speak for her." Next came the forensic expert, broken hyoid bone, clear strangulation marks. The victim could not have died from a fall. DNA matches Robert Reed. Female DNA on the tarp indicates assistance. Avery pushed back. The female DNA could be from the material seller, or someone who touched evidence later. But the physical evidence, photos, and hospital records weakened his arguments. Amid the tension, the prosecution called Ethan Reed, the most crucial witness. As he approached the stand, the courtroom fell deathly quiet. The 32-year-old man, tall, with steady but burdened eyes, he recounted, "I grew up in Hawaii, knowing nothing of my past. One day, I saw a missing child, New Jersey 1980 photo on a website. That child was me. I submitted DNA, and discovered my mother was the victim in this case." His voice caught, "I remember nothing of my father, but now I know he's the suspect in killing my mom. I don't know whether to hate or pity him." The defense asked one question, "Did you witness the events yourself?" Ethan shook his head. "I was only 6 months old, but DNA doesn't lie." That moment silenced the room. In the public gallery, some wiped tears. In closing arguments, Coleman stepped before the jury, voice rising powerfully. 30 years ago, Laura Mori was murdered and buried, as if she never existed. The evidence, DNA, testimony, and truth, all point to one man, Robert Reed. No more accident, no more mistake. Just the actions of a man covering his crime. Avery rebutted, "We have no clear motive, no direct witness. This is a case built on faded memories and forensic conjecture. Don't let justice become vengeance." Robert sat motionless. As Ethan left the stand, father and son's eyes met for a fleeting moment, a gaze mixed with guilt, pity, and an unbridgeable chasm. The trial lasted 7 days, every detail dissected. The press called it the 3-decade trial. Major papers and TV stations covered it non-stop. Some sympathized with Robert, the frail old man who had fled with his child in his arms. But most believed justice had finally spoken. On sentencing day, the courtroom was jammed. Before the jury retired, Coleman spoke deliberately. 31 years, that's how long a mother was denied her name, a son raised in lies. Today, the truth is no longer buried. The jury deliberated nearly 10 hours. When they returned, no one breathed. The clerk read the verdict. Defendant Robert Reed, guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. The words landed like a hammer blow. Robert closed his eyes, bowed his head. Ethan stood, but didn't look at his father. Some in the room sobbed. Faint applause rippled. Avery bowed his head, silent. Coleman gently closed his file, eyes on Laura's photo on the screen. Maria DeSantis, seated behind, exhaled slowly. She felt no victory, only heaviness. Outside the courthouse, Ocean County's sky was gray, wind rustling signs reading, "Justice for Laura Morey." The press dubbed it justice after 31 years. In the press room, Ethan gave a brief statement. "Justice for my mother doesn't erase the past, but it gives me the right to call her by name. Laura Morey, my mom." DeSantis watched, eyes quiet. For her the case closed not just with a life sentence for Robert Reed, but with restoring identity to a woman once buried in silence. 31 years, a lifetime of sin, silence, and finally, truth unveiled. The trial ended, but its echo lingered. When justice arrives late, it brings no joy, only a reminder that human memory, though forgotten, always finds its way back. On March 14, 2012, the Ocean County Court delivered its verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read, "The defendant Robert Reed is found guilty of first-degree murder." The gavel fell, closing a case that had spanned over 3 decades. Robert stood, his aged face gaunt and hollow. When asked for his final statement, he looked around the courtroom, his voice hoarse and weak. "For 30 years, I've paid in silence, but I didn't do it alone." The gallery erupted in murmurs. The judge frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Robert just shook his head, lips pressed tight. "She knows." Then silence. He was led away, camera flashes popping relentlessly. Ethan sat motionless, fists clenched, unsure if it was anger or pity. Prosecutor Michael Coleman and Detective Maria DeSantis exchanged glances. That statement cracked open another door, no less dark. Sentence, life imprisonment without parole. But as the iron door slammed shut, the investigation was far from over. In the cold case unit office in Trenton, DeSantis reviewed the entire file with the forensics team. New results confirmed, the female DNA sample found on the tarp matched no profile in the National CODIS database. Not Laura's, not an investigator's, and unrelated to the victim's family. DeSantis frowned. "So whose is it?" A technician replied, "Could be someone who helped him dispose of the body, or someone from Hawaii." They all recalled Nancy Wilburn, the nurse who worked at the Toms River Clinic and abruptly quit in 1980, then surfaced at Honolulu Hospital, where Ethan was adopted. Records showed Nancy vanished in 1982, leaving no address or bank account. DeSantis opened the old photo file, a blonde woman with empty eyes. A chill ran down her spine. If Nancy was truly Robert's accomplice, she hadn't just helped hide the body, she'd directly abandoned the child. When questioned again in prison, Robert just gave a faint smile. "She helped me, then disappeared." Some people know how to erase themselves from the world. "Is she Nancy Wilburn?" DeSantis asked. He didn't answer, only murmured, "The one who saves you sometimes buries you too." That was the last time they met. Police launched a separate investigation into the mystery woman, but it hit dead ends. No flights out of Hawaii, under Nancy's name, no death records, no financial traces, as if she'd never existed. The press quickly stirred up a frenzy. Headlines blared, "The Woman in the Shadows, the mystery woman of the Morey Reed case." TV replayed Robert's words, "I didn't do it alone." Theories flew, that Nancy was the lover, the accomplice, even the mastermind. But police couldn't prove anything more. Ethan read every article, heart heavy. He'd thought the verdict would seal the past, but that statement upended it all. "If there really is someone else, I need to know who she is," he said in an interview. "I need to know who took me away." DeSantis quietly sent the unknown female DNA sample to the FBI's new analysis lab. Results showed traces from a woman of European descent, rare gene markers, potentially matching Nancy Wilburn's medical records. 78% probability match, not enough for a conclusion. The case closed on paper, but the sidebar labeled, "Open, pending lead," remained in Trenton's cold file cabinet. Inside was an envelope with the unknown female DNA sample, clipped to the tarp fragment, and the old Polaroid photo. All silent, but as if waiting for someone to return and finish the story. 3 years later, Robert Reed died in prison of a stroke, leaving no further confessions. Ethan returned to Hawaii, carrying his mother's ashes. On the beach where he'd grown up, he scattered them into the sea, and whispered, "I've learned part of the truth, but not all of it." The waves carried them away, leaving shimmering trails in the sunset. The story closed with a verdict of justice, but it also opened an unsolved mystery: the blonde woman. Where had she gone, and was she the final shadow over Laura Morey's case? A foggy morning at Freehold Cemetery, April winds whispering through silent rows of trees. Ethan Reed stood before the fresh gravestone engraved with his mother's name. Laura Morey, 1953-1980. She was never forgotten. He placed a bouquet of white daisies and the old Polaroid photo atop it, Laura cradling him as a newborn, her eyes gentle and serene. "I've found you, Mom," he whispered, "but I wish it hadn't been like this." For 30 years, Ethan had lived a quiet life in Hawaii. Ordinary job, friends, simple days, until discovering he was the child from the 1980 missing persons file, everything crumbled. Now he was no longer just Ethan Reed, but the son of a murdered mother, and of the killer himself. He still remembered his last visit with his father in prison. Robert Reed, frail, voice trembling. "I didn't do it alone." Ethan stayed silent, thinking it mere denial. But after Robert died in prison, those words haunted him, like the truth hadn't stopped there. Ethan knelt, fingers lightly touching the cold stone. "They say justice has come, Mom. But justice didn't bring you back. It just let me know the pain is real." He looked up at the gray sky, wind tasseling his hair, carrying the scent of damp earth. In his heart, justice now felt heavy, no longer the bright word from books, just a sad ending to a long search. The name change form was still in his jacket pocket. He'd filed it after the verdict. He chose a new surname, neither Reed nor back to Morey. A stranger's name, to leave behind the land where it all began. Maybe this is the only way to move on, he told himself. That afternoon, he drove the old road along the Manasquan River woods, where her body had been found. Spring scenery bloomed green, but through his eyes, it was still shaded gray by memory. He pulled over by the roadside, gazing at the still water, whispering, "You were here, Mom, and I was here too. I just don't remember." Wind whistling through the pines made him shiver. For a moment, he thought he heard a child's cry, a woman's faint call in the night, sounds that didn't exist, but never stopped echoing in his mind. Leaning over the water, he saw his reflection, half his mother's eyes, half his father's features. Love and guilt blended, inseparable. He breathed deep, whispering, "I can't erase the past, but I can choose a different way to live." On his last night in New Jersey, he sat by the hotel window, writing in his notebook, "Justice isn't an ending, it's a mirror showing us the shadows. I don't know who the woman named Nancy is, but I know Mom fought to the last moment, and maybe that's why I have to keep going." He closed the notebook, looking out. Street lights reflected on the glass, just like the truck headlights Jackie Alvarez once described, the light that started his life's tragedy. The next morning, Ethan left Freehold as the sun rose. The road was empty, the "Welcome to Ocean County" sign fading in the rear view. He didn't look back. To him that land was no longer home, just a place burying answers he never wanted to dig up again. On the plain out of New Jersey, he looked down through the window. Below were forest patches, the river, small towns, all blurring into memory's haze. He didn't know his next destination, only that he was leaving the past behind, abandoning names, whispers, and his father's sins. But memories don't vanish. In his mind still rang his mother's laugh, his father's raspy voice. "I didn't do it alone." Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the mud-stained tarp, ghostly women's hands, and his own gaze, half light, half shadow. He opened his phone, revisiting an old article, "The Morey Case, Justice After 31 Years. Then he deleted it, like erasing his own name from history. The plane pierced the clouds. Sunlight hit his face, but his eyes stayed sad. Below, New Jersey shrank to a faint scar in his mind. Ethan murmured, just loud enough for himself, "I'll carry you, Mom," not as a tragedy, but as the one thing that's still real. and as the sky opened ahead, he knew justice had done its part, while the truth, something no one could define, would walk with him forever, like a shadow never leaving memory. As the plane carrying Ethan left New Jersey, below the echoes of the Laura Maury case still rippled across the state. From an anonymous cold file tagged Jane Doe 81, it became a national media focal point, a testament that time can't bury crime. Right after the verdict, Dateline NBC aired a special episode, The Mother Who Vanished. Images of Laura Maury, the Polaroid photo, and the truck headlights from Jackie Alvarez's account flashed across screens to millions. The report ended with prosecutor Michael Coleman's words, "Justice may sleep, but it never dies." Soon after, Netflix announced a mini-series, The Shadows of Manasquan, based on the case. It quickly topped the true crime category, hailed as a tribute to Detective Maria DeSantis, who persevered to crack the case after 30 years. Alongside, the Cold Justice podcast dropped 2 special episodes, with a somber narrator. A child grows up in peace, then discovers he's the son of a murder case. Sometimes truth is crueler than lies. In Manchester Township, local authorities held a memorial for Laura Maury by the Manasquan River, where her body was found. Residents brought flowers, photos, and handwritten notes. Jackie Alvarez, the old neighbor, quietly placed the faded Polaroid on the memorial table. "I've kept this photo for 30 years, she said. "Now Laura can rest in peace." In her speech, the mayor said, "We can't change the past, but we can remember the names of those forgotten." After the ceremony, a small bronze statue was erected at Freehold Cemetery, engraved, "In memory of Laura Maury, and every Jane Doe who waited too long to be found." The statue depicted a woman cradling a child, gazing toward the horizon, a symbol for the nameless souls in cold cases. In Trenton, Detective Maria DeSantis received the state's Forensic Dedication Medal, but facing the cameras, she only said, "Justice isn't an end, it's a reminder that memories must be kept alive." A reporter asked, "What about the woman with the unknown DNA?" Maria looked straight into the lens, "We're still looking. Only when we know her name will this case truly close." Her faint smile couldn't hide the weary gaze. Deep down, DeSantis knew, a shadow figure remained unnamed, and perhaps always would. Meanwhile, Ethan chose to vanish. He declined interviews, documentaries, and all media contact. One journalist recounted, "He left Hawaii, no one knows his new whereabouts. Maybe silence is how he's saving himself." On social media, public opinion split 2 ways. One side praised the justice, calling it a symbol of faith and DNA science. The other questioned, is justice enough when the accomplice is still free? Forensic experts hailed the Maury-Reed case as clear proof of DNA analysis power. From one hair and a photo, the past unraveled. A Rutgers criminology professor told NPR, "Before cold cases meant closure. Now one cell can rewrite history." In Manchester, Laura Maury's story became collective memory. School kids learned of her courage in community safety programs. A teacher founded the Laura Maury Scholarship Fund for female students pursuing forensics. They said, "If one small woman can make a whole state remember her name after 30 years, no one is meaningless." And DeSantis, though lauded as the one who brought Jane Doe back to the world, couldn't shake the unfinished feeling. In an internal report, she handwrote a short line, "Case closed in name, not in truth." In 2014, Netflix released the documentary. Millions teared up seeing Ethan place white daisies on his mother's grave, and walk away without looking back. The final credits rolled over black. The woman whose DNA was on the tarp remains unidentified. Online buzz reignited. Someone posted, "Cases like this have no real ending, just the living carrying the memories onward." Manchester returned to quiet, but every April, residents still brought flowers to the Manasquan riverbank. They didn't just honor Laura, they commemorated the nameless Jane Does, women forgotten in cold case shadows. In that crowd, sometimes Maria DeSantis stood alone, clutching white daisies, eyes distant. She knew the case was closed, but memory stayed open. Because justice can seal a file, but memory, and the lingering ache, never fades. On the Manasquan waters, afternoon light mirrored the sky, like Laura Maury's silhouette, quiet, gentle, but eternal. In the story of Laura Maury and Ethan, today's very American, details remind us of harsh realities. A neighbor, Jackie Alvarez, stayed silent before signs of domestic violence. The Polaroid accidentally capturing Robert's facial scratch became evidence, an age progression photo on missing kids. Gov made Ethan question his identity and submit DNA, and Detective DeSantis doggedly dug up the cold file to name Jane Doe. 81. The key lessons. First, don't downplay domestic violence. If you hear arguments, breaking objects like that night in Manchester Township, call 911, or the Domestic Violence Hotline, and note times, sounds, license plates, like Jackie remembered the truck headlights. Second, preserve and digitize mementos that can save justice. Jackie's 30-year kept Polaroid became a link. In real life, photos, texts, emails, location histories should be safely backed up. Third, leverage public infrastructure. Missing kids, GovNamus, and DNA labs can connect scattered pieces. Ethan was just an ordinary citizen, but restarted the whole case. Fourth, respect victims and families amid media frenzy. Ethan chose a name change and refused interviews. In real life, privacy and trauma therapy matter more than storytelling on Dateline or Netflix. Fifth, justice can come late and incomplete. The female DNA unidentified, so communities need patience and ongoing support. Join memorials like in Freehold, donate to forensic scholarships, or volunteer for cold case reviews. Finally, if you've ever been someone who knows a little, speak up sooner. Don't let Jackie's regret become your own. Justice needs evidence, but it starts with individual courage. If you believe every truth deserves to be found, hit subscribe to join us in exploring more unsolved cold cases. Thank you for joining Laura Maury's story. See you in the next video, where justice awakens from the past once more.